district proposal. Mr. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the Chief Executive, just a slight mistake. I just point out in the executive summary, which I apologise to Mr. Williams about. The Emergency Management Committee resolved to support this in principle in 2013, not 2012. Apologies for that. I'll take the item as read, Mr. Chair. This reflects previous discussions by the Emergency Management Committee and also your discussions during deliberations and the submissions that were received as part of that additional process. As you can see, the majority of submissions were in favour of the enlarged rural fire district, so happy to answer any questions relating to that.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Fox. Everyone hear that all right? Any questions?
Could I ask Mr. Fox the implications of DOC 6/2? They withdrew or something. What withdrew their funding?
So, when the Chief Executive was in negotiations with the other agencies, private and public, there was some discussion around the liability issues. At one point in those negotiations, DOC had offered to act as the banker and meet those liabilities. They then had further discussions around that, and if memory serves me right, Mr. Williams, they withdrew that offer.
Yes, through the negotiation process we asked for double on the basis that we might get half, and we got half, so we came out of the negotiation with an expected position rather than one that we didn't really want.
Okay. Any other questions regarding that? Councillor Jollins.
Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Your Worship. Just a question for Mr. Fox. Is there any likelihood that the steering committee will go away from their recommendation of a hybrid model to one of the other two options that are highlighted in your paper?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding is that the model that is approved by the MOU once it's signed and the budgets that are associated with it will be set for 5 years, I think, from memory. So that's, I don't want to speculate as to what a steering committee or a new board might decide in the future, but that's the initial understanding we have.
Thank you.
Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. With the options, obviously with the risks, the potential for volunteer disengagement, it's not actually mentioned as a disadvantage. Do you, from experience, is this a real, particularly relevant or real sort of concern?
The volunteer disengagement? That's, as I mentioned during the deliberations, that's a risk we have at all times. So I don't see it as a new risk. It's a hazard that's always there, and with volunteers will always be there. With this model, we'd be sharing that risk to a greater extent with a new agency and the partners within it.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Okay. Any other questions or queries? Councillor Jollins, thank you. Suggested resolution, thank you, Councillor Jollins. Seconded by Councillor Cousins. Oh, Truman. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Item number 7, 29 Tufari Tower Street. Disposal discussion. Gemma and Flash, nice to see you here. Okay.
I think before we start, we'll start with the mistakes first, as traditional.
Had it pointed out, and I'm sure you probably picked up by it. In terms of option 2, the first line, there's an advantage and disadvantage, and they were supposed to be altered to be the converse of what they actually say. So with advantage, the first advantage, it should say no annual maintenance costs, and the second line it would say parking would be lost. So please forgive me for that error.
I'm sorry,
December 4.
Go through that again, please.
Okay, so on page 7 bar 4, option 2, the first line has an advantages and the disadvantages. One of them says annual maintenance cost estimated at $5,000. That's not applicable once you sell the site. Obviously, it's no annual maintenance costs. And the other one, you would obviously be losing a car park, so parking would be lost.
Okay.
Other than that, if it's all right with yourselves, take the item as read, and just as we were summarising before, it's a decision due to be made, and hopefully we've covered off the two options that we're consulted with, and that's the options that, from my understanding from a legal perspective, is where the decision needs to be made. So that's why they've been written in that form, which corresponds to the two which you consulted with covered on.
Okay, all right. Zane. Sorry, I was just reading.
Mr. Chairman, I know I've got my grumpy pants on today, but I was just reading through the advantages and disadvantages of both option 1 and option 2, and I've got to say I'm a bit concerned. Like, this is an example for, I'm not too sure who writes these, or it might have been you, folk. If we go to option 2, and you've got reduced debt levels, 1.2 million rateable value, one-off, need to account for costs, and then below that you've got avoids the need to service debt. Now, they are the same thing, are they not?
It's the interest on the debt. So yes, of course, you're getting rid of the basic 1.2 million. So maybe you could say that was the case. But what happened with this was I hadn't thought about the interest factor of having the $1.2 million sitting there. We've obviously got to pay the interest on the debt, and so that was an added bonus. I think I was listening to one of the knitters during the discussions, and they said, "Oh well, look, there's interest on debt." So it was reasonable to reflect that in there. So that's why that's in there in that form.
And directly below that, you've got developer pays rates. We're paying $8,000 ourselves on rates, but that's just a column. You take $8,000 from there, put $8,000 into there. So no money changes hands for us, correct?
No, when they put a development on it, that would.
No, but if it was to be sold, there would be $8,000 coming in.
So we wouldn't be paying it anymore. That's the only benefit. Someone else would be.
Okay, and in my little brain, I did a couple of advantages if we retain it. These are the advantages that I've got, which aren't in there, which I thought was a little bit of concern. And I suppose the council shouldn't really be thinking too much about commercial viability for the existing businesses, but a couple of the advantages I saw of retention were the ongoing beneficial economic use for local businesses, which it should be an advantage for keeping it. Long-term financial gain from the asset, which we're in the worst part of the market, so the market's only going to improve, so the asset's going to be worth more for us in the mid to long term. Maintaining the integrity of the CBD in light of current economic downturn, and thus not overpopulating the CBD with buildings that we can't rent. And also, and it can be taken two ways with this, that we keep in line with current council policy. To me, those should have been in there. And they're probably just oversights, but I get the impression I feel we're leaning one way. That's what it feels to me.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I can. This is, and as councillors, you're entitled to look, to disagree, to add in your own mind when you're weighing up a decision. The item in front of you is council officers' views, and that's when we've taken everything into account, weighed it all up, we've put the advantages and disadvantages for you as we see them, and I stress that's as we see them. You may have a completely different set of considerations, and that's absolutely fine, because you're elected to the position to make those decisions. We're employed here to give you our view. This is giving our view.
And this is not getting you, just these things I've just ran through my mind, I've got them down, I thought they would be in here, because the economic benefit for the community, like as I said to some people here the other night, that I drove past here at 8:30 at night, and that car park was packed with people, and I couldn't get a car park to go and buy some food, so I ended up going to KFC. So it obviously is used at that night. So I got to look at it from the economic standpoint for the existing businesses, how it's benefiting them, and that's a big player, which I would like to have sort of seen in there. Sorry, guys.
Yes, that's probably a valid point, and I guess I was looking at it in terms of when I was doing the evaluation, noting that obviously Huhu Street, which is pretty much one street away, is pretty much empty at the time at which you're talking about, and so the distance that you're talking, it didn't seem like a...
No. See, I'm lazy. I drove around the corner to KFC.
And so that's the sort of value. Yes, there would be an impact in terms of that direct, immediate car park being there, but there are some other opportunities. And so,
Councillor Harvey.
And I thought during our deliberations we had actually decided that we were going to change our resolution. So this is where I'm also a little bit confused. And I thought that we had decided we weren't going to sell it, but we also weren't going to do option 2. We weren't going to spend any money on it. We were going to put it on hold, and we were going to revisit it. So this is where I'm a little bit confused with this.
With your, through yourself, we can only bring back to you what went out to public consultation. That was the legal advice. Now, from there, you are in the position to vary, change whatever, but because that was what was consulted on, that was what we are obliged to bring back to you.
Right.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Councillor Stewart.
I was under the same impression as Rosie, and that we weren't going to put the walkways through, and that we were just going to look at the potholes that might need fixing there, but not do anything major and not sell it at this point in time.
Actually, while we're on that subject, Councillor Stewart, what are the implications if we don't put the walkway through? Do you mind giving us those?
We went out for consultation with the walkway in both options. So if I was an adjoining business that didn't care which way it went because I knew I was getting the walkway, we're possibly leaving ourselves slightly vulnerable.
I'll probably go one step further than that.
Yeah.
You as a council have an adopted council policy that the walkway will go through at some stage. That's in your SISP. What you need to do through your long-term plan process, regardless of if the decision isn't to sell, what you need to do through your long-term plan process is decide whenabouts within that 10-year period you allow for the development of that walkway and how much that development is. But you can do that as part of your long-term plan process. It's then if you don't do that at some stage, inverted commas, is when adjoining property owners have made investment decisions based on your adopted council policy, which is to have a walkway through the middle, that they could take challenge at that because they've made investment decisions based on your adopted council policy.
Your Worship, could I just have a point of clarification of that? When's this up for renewal?
So that's 10 years now? Yeah, 10 years from adoption, so you've got another
2021.
2021. Don't want to go back there.
So I think
we've only just got through the court.
Effectively, Your Worship, the instance of the walkway doesn't exist.
Yes, it does. The walkway is in your adopted council policy. What you haven't done yet is funded it, and that's because in that council adopted policy it says that I think it's medium term that it talks about. The medium term, I think in the language would be that you need to consider that as part of your LTP and when that funding comes up. So you're going to have to do that within the next 12 months. Consider when in the next 10 years you fund that. If you don't, then you are in serious ability for judicial review unless you change the plan, which would require going back to the start of all of this and going back through that $1 million process that we've just come out of.
Councillor Kreskowski, then Hickling, and then Cousins.
Jollins.
Then Williamson.
I might have to come back because I have a number of questions. Due to the fact that I wasn't part of the deliberations, I may be doubling up on it. But my first question that arises is, if we were to sell the site, and then the owner were to own both the car park and the adjacent site, what could the owner build on that site?
Within the district plan,
Alleyway.
yeah.
So it could
build up and over that walkway. It's a three-dimensional.
So it could conceivably be a 3-story restaurant or hotel,
Yes.
which would require presumably some car parking requirements.
No, not in the current industrial plan.
Okay.
Councillor Hickling.
Yeah, I think during the discussions, we don't again want to close the door on this. I don't think anyway. And if we're not careful, the information that was given to us during discussions was, if we don't sell it, then when we do want to sell it in perhaps 2 years' time or whenever, then we have to go back through all the process of handing back. That's where I have real difficulty because it's taken us almost 18 months to get to this point. So that's my understanding at the moment, and I'd like the opportunity to probably even tweak the suggested number 1 resolution when it's the appropriate time.
Yep. Cool. Councillor Cousins. I don't know about that.
Start getting confused.
Councillor Williamson.
Just back to Gareth's point with respect to the walkway. Sure, the walkway easements in the SISP. It does say it doesn't necessarily give a time constraint except 20 years, incrementally done over 20 years. So, and the second part is there has been any obligation to do that with respect to the development front with the Roberts to Lone Star Has there been indication that it would be done like?
So again, in the plan, I think it talks about, in the same top of my head, I think it talks about medium term, and so that's up to that 20 years. So it's talking long term, so 20 years plus. That's what I'm saying is that this LTP would be the time that you have that discussion. If you didn't sell it, you'd have that discussion about when and how much you allowed for that walkway to happen. The discussions with the front landowner have only been but what's in the plan and based on the plan, which is that the walkway will be provided through the site in the medium term.
Councillor Cousins.
In response to Councillor Hickling's comment about, closing the door, well, I thought we were making a decision about whether or not we retain it, and we are making a commitment to retain it. We're not saying next year, 2 years. I think the previous council may have made a decision to sell it, but...
well, we're debating the two issues, surely.
Which is?
Sell or not sell.
Not sell, that's right. So if we vote to keep, then I don't see why we need to put a backdoor policy in there that we're going to sell it in the future.
I think if I can...
I'm saying I don't want the door closed totally. So, and option 2
we can
actually does that.
But we can sell it in the future. We just have to go through the process again. That's right.
Which is lengthy and you could lose it.
Lose what, sorry?
You could lose because you have to hand it back to the original owners.
At market value.
Yeah, and if they want to purchase
which will still be on the win.
No, because then you wouldn't be able to get the walkway through.
Well, no, because the policies dictates what they're going to be able to build. We've already said that. We're already saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're saying that whoever buys it has to make allocations for a walkway.
So there is an easement through the site, I guess, and so the walkway would be protected if it's sold. I guess the issue is, and the concern is that from what we heard through the submission process, and you heard it from Chrissy McCowie as an example, saying don't sell until that adjoining site goes, because then you do the whole bit as a block. I guess from what I'm picking up from the councillor saying, and it is a real risk, is that a risk that you need to be aware of is that if you say that you're not going to sell it now, then whenever that happens, be it 2 years or 5 years or 10 years time, you have to start and go back through that process. Now that provides a time and an expense, but probably more risky is that the owner that you then have to offer it back to could look at that if there's a proposal on the table for the adjoining site, could look at that and say, I'm going to take that profit out of this. So they could take the offer back, buy it back off you at market value at that time, and then sell it for a profit to the person who wants to do the development, or stifle the development, put their own little whatever in there which could kill the development.
That's really what if.
It is what if, but I'm just explaining that's the risk which you need to be aware of when you're making your decision.
At this stage, we can determine the future of it. We can dictate who actually buys it, and we have some rules around.
Dictate who buys it.
Well, we can have some planning rules around it. So it's a lot better than dealing with someone you don't know.
Your Worship, I wish to move a motion in your resolution in this regard. It'll read, we do not sell the 2 Torres Street car park, and any future development of the site will be considered as part of the 10-year plan process.
Okay. So that's not quite. Is that what we're running to? Like, what's the general feeling? I think around the table is that, as the deputy mayor has said, we don't want to close the door forever on this. And I think
does not do that.
Yeah, and I think you're right there.
And Your Worship, if we look at a draft annual plan that's currently on our desks that refers to retaining ownership and reviewing it under the long-term plan. Is that correct?
The wording that's been put in there is based on the deliberations discussion, and obviously whatever decision that gets made here would need to have an amendment. So there's backup if for example, you change it and go with something that's that needs to be reflected in that, and that's why this is before that particular item getting accepted.
Your Worship, I need a seconder.
Yeah. It's been moved and seconded. Okay, now I just want a clarification here. Does this close the door or not?
I'm concerned with the wording, so I was just going to say, can you please repeat it for me so I can... Yeah. Sorry.
It's basically what staff have given us. The ended words, it starts with, we do not sell the 2 Torres Street car park, at this time, and any future development of the site will be considered as part of the 10-year plan process.
So I guess the question is, Rob Goldsberry, would that mean that we then have to go back through the Public Works Act or the contractual offer back, should the council have an option for selling the site at some stage in the future?
I suppose there is that risk. I suppose there's two ways of not closing the door. One is to say no, but we'll review it, and the other one is to say yes, but not now. Now, in terms of going back, the risk of going back through having to go back through the processes, the risk of challenge, yes, but not now, is less risky than no, but we'll review it later. In terms of those risks.
Councillor Hickling?
As I read it, the motion that's been suggested is a no, but we'll review it, which has those greater risks. It's worded that way.
So how do we,
Mr. Goldsberry, can we just, we went out on two options. What are the implications if we choose, if there's a different option chosen? How does that, just in terms of the decision making and future legal process, we've had one legal challenge.
Again, an option that is option one, but further consideration as to when and how is put off is less risky in terms of challenge than an option that says no, but we'll review it later. Just in terms of the risk, I can't say that either of any modified option doesn't have some risk, because what you consulted on was these two options in their start forms, and any modification that has some risks, but a version of option one that defers the when, in my view, is less risky than option two, but reviewing it. That could be, the when could be deferred to be part of the long.
Okay, Councillor John, Councillor Hickling, sorry, it was Councillor.
I'm not quite sure of procedure here. I'm not quite sure of procedure here, Your Worship.
Yeah.
But I've got an alteration to option one that I would like to put.
You've already got a mover and a seconder.
So can I have some clarifications?
You've got a mover and a seconder. You could amend that. You could move to an amendment to that resolution, but it can't be in direct contrast to that resolution. Otherwise, that resolution has to be put, and the result either lost or carried.
Through the chair, can we not?
Well, it's an amendment to the option one. So do you have to put this one first?
This one's already on the table.
Okay.
Through you, Your Worship, what Councillor Hickling what Your Worship could have is that Councillor Hickling might indicate the wording of his resolution that might come up if this resolution was, for instance, lost. So rather than amending it, saying this is what I might be putting up.
Yep.
Certain things out.
Okay, I'll come back to you in a minute, Councillor Hickling. Councillor Jollins, do you just want to say something?
Sorry, I was just going to say, why don't we vote on the suggested motion put forward by Councillor Body and see where we sit?
Okay, just before we do that, I'll just go back to Councillor Hickling just to perhaps give us an idea of what he was intending.
Your Worship, point of order. If Councillor Hickling moves something that refers to the walkway, etc., it's not a.
He's not going to move it. He's just talking. Still talking.
What I'm saying is the one that I have moved is very, very clear. It doesn't mention walkways, time, things, whatever. It just says long-term plan.
Yep,
yeah,
appreciate that.
Sure about
so we just have a Councillor.
Mine doesn't either, Your Worship. I'd just make this as a alternative suggestion. It's that council defer the sale of 29 Turangi-Tongariro Street for a period of 12 months, pending further investigation into market interest and opportunities with adjoining property owners.
Okay, we'll go back to the Councillor Christowski.
There is still a third option that no one has considered, and clearly seeing there's such a division which warrants further debate, you could actually defer the item. Well, you haven't got the minutes of the deliberations to refer to, right? And I certainly can't comment on the minutes or what was deliberated on. And it quite clearly states in here, Council may also wish to consider the ability to retain some flexibility in future where ownership is retained in the short term, etc., etc. None of that has been explained, nor has it been explained what the risks are, which state whichever approach is utilised for this property could be seen as setting a precedent for any future decisions relating to car parking. Has that been debated? I rest my case.
Okay, we've got a resolution on the table. It's been moved and seconded. Does anyone else want to talk to the resolution? Or the resolution? Can you just repeat the resolution again, please, Councillor?
We do not feel the 2 Forest Street car park. Any future development of the site will be considered as part of the 10-year plan process. As I'm the last speaker, I'd just like to speak to it, and I quote what staff have said.
You've got the last word, so it's just whether there's anyone else.
Yeah, is there anyone else?
Sorry.
Want to talk to the resolution? For the resolution?
For or against?
For or against the resolution? Okay.
Well, while the council identified option 1, selling the site as a preferred choice, when it went out for consultation, once submissions were considered, the council decided that the site should be retained, any further development. So I rest my case.
Right. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Do I put the motion? All those, yeah, you want to speak against it?
Yes, please. Because then we can.
Okay, you've got the motion. All those in favour, could I have a show of hands, please? Okay, those against? Motion is lost. Thank you. Would you like to?
So now I'd put a suggested alteration to option 1, Your Worship. And I'll read it out. That the council defers the sale of 29 Turangi-Tongariro Street for a period of 12 months, pending further investigation into market interest and opportunities with adjoining property owners.
Moving that resolution.
And I'll move that resolution, Your Worship.
Yep.
Seconded by Councillor Park. Anyone want to speak for the motion or against?
Can I ask a question?
Councillor Stewart.
If we go with this version and it's got a time frame in there of 12 months, does it mean we have to sell it after 12 months, or it can not be done then, it can keep going out and out, or whatever the market is saying?
Could come back to you for consideration.
And I'd just like to say the reason.
You have the last say, actually.
Okay.
Which refers back to Rod, this with respect to both those options you mentioned before. Does this have still impact on the Public Works Act and the potential buyback to the previous owner with deferment?
Again, I can't be completely, it's not black and white, but of course, a deferral of 12 months is less risky than a no, for instance, in respect of having to go back to the Public Works Act. The longer you defer, the greater the risk. However, on the other side, in terms of the value, well, no, we've gone past the offer back has happened. So, it has happened. So if you keep deferring it after 12 months for the next 5 years, there would come a point when a court might say you've kept deferring it too long, you've effectively decided not to sell it and start again. But I think the risk of that happening in a 12-month deferral is not very high.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Thanks, Chairman. Okay, it's been moved Councillor Hickling, seconded by Councillor Park. Could I have a show of hand, please, for all those in
speaking?
Or did you want to say something?
Oh, I was only going to put a reason why, and that is in the conclusion, paragraph 3. Just spells that out as far as I'm concerned, because it talks about the disposal at the right time, and it might be the right time in another 12 months. We don't know.
Probably market will be fabulous then.
Just a clarification to 7-4 in your note, Flash, about the person that did the legal action prior. He was not the person that submitted. Yeah. You've got the owner of the site was the party who made the legal threat of legal.
It was an error. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's, could that minutes be changed? Yep.
Just delete that sentence.
Okay, so we have a resolution there.
Can I ask a question?
Harvey, sorry.
Can we sell it before?
Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
An item could be brought back to you if there was someone who was interested. I suspect.
Well, that was my.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But we couldn't do that without coming back through.
Right. No, it'd have to come back to council.
Had the, yeah.
Right, okay.
All right, show of hands, please. Those in favour? Barry's resolution. Yep. Those against? Okay, the motion is carried. Thank you.
Your Worship, on that. Your Worship, sorry, clarification.
Abstain?
Although the motion has been carried, it will protect the walkway.
No.
The walkway's there forever.
There's an easement